In June 1944, the Eastern Front is on fire, but not only in Poland or Belarus. Far north, on the Karelian Isthmus, the Soviet Union opens a powerful offensive designed to force Finland out of the war on Soviet terms. The goal is not merely to retake ground. It's to break Finland politically, fast, so the Soviet High Command can tidy the northern flank before the final push toward Germany's heartland. The stakes for Finland are as high as they get. If the defensive line on the isthmus collapses, the road network and terrain funnel any retreat into fewer and fewer corridors. That makes it easier for a rapid Soviet advance to cut units apart, seize crossings, and turn an organized withdrawal into a rout. And politically, the message would be unmistakable: negotiate now or face occupation later. But here's what most summaries miss: this wasn't one battle. It was a timed sequence, and the timing was the weapon. The Soviet summer offensive on the isthmus hits hard. Finnish forward positions are cracked, then pressed again. The city of Viipuri, Vyborg, falls quickly, and that loss isn't just symbolic. It's a psychological shock and a practical problem. When a fortress city drops, it suggests the whole front might be unzipping. Finland's answer is not a single heroic stand. It's a controlled retreat to terrain that favors defense, a line anchored on water obstacles, forests, and choke points where armor can't spread out and where artillery can be concentrated. The VKT Line, running from the Gulf of Viipuri toward the WWII river system, becomes the frame of the entire story. On the map it looks like a line. In reality, it's a patchwork of positions that only works if the defenders don't panic, don't get outflanked, and don't run out of ammunition. That last point matters more than people like to admit. Finland is not a bottomless warehouse. Every artillery shell spent today is a shell not available tomorrow, unless supply can be sustained. So defense becomes a constant calculation: when to fight for time, when to trade ground, and when to commit reserves for a counterpunch. On the Soviet side, the pressure builds for a breakthrough that doesn't just push Finland back. It snaps Finland's ability to resist. Soviet commanders look for the place where concentrated artillery, armor, and infantry can punch through and then widen the gap. That's how large offensives end campaigns, not with one shove, but with one breach that makes the rest of the line irrelevant. And here's the twist: Finland can't defend everywhere, so it must guess where the main blow will land. By late June, that main blow narrows toward the Tali-Ihantala area on the Karelian Isthmus. This isn't an empty wilderness. It's a web of roads, ridges, fields, and forest edges where movement is channeled. It's also close enough to key routes that a successful Soviet thrust here could force a deeper retreat and threaten to unravel the entire defensive posture. Finnish command reshuffles responsibility and priorities. The job is brutally simple: hold long enough to keep the army intact, and keep political options open. Holding doesn't mean never moving backward. It means never allowing the enemy to turn movement into collapse. At the front, the experience feels like a grinder. Soviet artillery prepares attacks with heavy barrages. Infantry probes and assaults follow. Armor tries to find lanes where it can move, turn a defensive position, and force the Finns to abandon ground. If that happens, it becomes harder to reform lines, because defenders are always arriving after the enemy has already chosen the next pressure point. So Finland needs something more than courage. It needs a method that can break attacks quickly, before they become momentum. And that's where the story begins to shift toward the hidden engine of Tali-Ihantala: coordination. Finnish artillery doctrine, shaped over years, is built around rapid correction and flexible concentration. The goal is not merely to fire more. It's to place fire where it matters, when it matters, and switch targets fast enough to disrupt the enemy's rhythm. If a Soviet assault group forms up, you want to smash it before it moves. If a bridgehead is being prepared, you want to collapse it before it becomes a crossing. If armor queues on a narrow approach, you want to punish the queue. But artillery doesn't work alone. It requires observers, communication, and a discipline that prevents wasted fire. And it requires command to accept that sometimes the most effective counterattack is not a charge. It's a timed barrage that makes a charge unnecessary. Rehook. The twist is that the battle is about minutes, not miles. As pressure increases, Finland also seeks support where it can. German aid arrives in limited but meaningful forms, especially anti-tank weapons, assault guns, and air support elements that can blunt Soviet spearheads. This isn't a magical rescue. It's reinforcement at a vulnerable moment, meant to buy time and restore balance where the line is thinnest. Meanwhile, Soviet commanders keep feeding strength into the problem because the strategic goal remains: force Finland to accept terms by making continued resistance look hopeless. That logic is powerful, but it has a risk. If repeated attacks fail, time is lost, and time is exactly what the Soviets are trying to save for larger operations elsewhere. By the end of June, the battle's shape becomes clearer. The Soviets have the mass to keep attacking. The Finns have the positional advantage and the need to survive. Every day the line holds is a day Finland remains a negotiating actor rather than a defeated object. But survival isn't guaranteed, because the battlefield is narrowing. The Soviet offensive is pushing the Finns from Tali toward Ihantala, compressing the defense into zones where there is less room to absorb shock. If the Soviets break through here, it won't be a tidy retreat. It will be a cascading problem: units cut off, artillery positions threatened, command and control strained, and political pressure spiking overnight. Rehook, and here's the uncomfortable question: what happens when the defender runs out of space? In the first days of July, the fight hardens into a contest over whether Finland can turn this narrowing corridor into a trap for the attacker, or whether the corridor becomes a funnel that the Soviets can force open. Finnish reserves are moved with care. Artillery ammunition is allocated with cold discipline. And the defenders begin preparing something that only works if the timing is perfect. Because the next Soviet push won't be another attack. It will be the attempt to end the campaign's uncertainty. Mini cliffhanger: the Soviets are assembling for a concentrated blow toward Ihantala, and Finland is about to bet everything on an artillery plan that either stops the spearhead in place or fails so loudly that there may be no second chance. The Soviet summer offensive on the Karelian Isthmus smashed through Finland's forward defenses and captured Viipuri, pushing the Finnish army back onto the VKT Line. The fight narrowed into the Tali-Ihantala area, terrain that channeled movement and made every road and ridge matter. Finland's stakes were national survival: hold the line long enough to keep the army intact and keep political options alive. The Soviets, aiming for a rapid decision, kept pressing for a breakthrough that would turn an organized withdrawal into collapse. Now, with the battlefield tightening and space running out, Finland prepares a high-risk answer: concentrated fire and carefully timed reserves, because the next Soviet push is designed to finish the job. The escalation begins with a simple reality: the Soviet side can afford to keep trying. The Soviet plan is built on mass and repetition: heavy preparation fires, assault waves, armor probing for lanes, then renewed pressure when a weak point is found. In many places on the Eastern Front, that pattern breaks defenders by exhausting them. But at Ihantala, the pattern runs into a defense designed to punish predictability. Finnish commanders focus on two linked goals. First, prevent a clean Soviet breakthrough. Second, avoid wasting men in counterattacks that win a field but lose the army. That means the defense must be elastic at the edge but stubborn at the core, bend when needed, then slam shut when the enemy commits. Here's the twist: the most important Finnish movement isn't forward. It's sideways: batteries, observers, and reserves aligning for one decisive response. Finnish artillery concentration becomes the centerpiece. When Soviet formations gather in jump-off areas, the Finns aim to strike them before they can turn organization into motion. This depends on rapid-fire correction and coordination across many batteries, so that multiple units can converge on the same target area without losing time to complicated re-aiming and recalculation. In practical terms, it means Soviet assault groups can be hit not by one battalion's worth of shells, but by a synchronized storm that arrives at the moment of maximum vulnerability, when troops are packed, vehicles are queued, and momentum is about to begin. The battle becomes a contest between two clocks. The Soviet clock: build pressure, break the line, exploit quickly. The Finnish clock: identify the forming attack, concentrate fire, disrupt the assault, then reset before the next attempt. Air support enters the story not as a fantasy ace narrative but as a practical tool. When aircraft can strike concentrated targets, especially armor and supply points, they amplify the defender's timing advantage. And on a narrow battlefield, a few effective strikes can force attackers to pause, reroute, and reorganize, each pause costing time the offensive can't easily replace. And the twist is that stopping an offensive often looks like forcing the enemy to keep starting over. At the same time, Finnish anti-tank defenses work in a layered way. Some weapons deter armor at close range, others punish vehicles stuck on predictable approaches. The goal isn't to duel tanks in open fields, it's to make armored thrusts expensive and uncertain, so infantry advances lose the confidence that armor is supposed to provide. Soviet attacks continue. Some local gains occur. Finnish positions are tested and, in places, forced back. But the key question remains, does any of this add up to a breakthrough? Because tactical progress is only strategic progress if it opens routes, splits defenses, and creates exploitation. At Ihantala, the defenders aim to prevent exactly that. Even when pushed, they seek to fall back in ways that keep the defensive geometry intact. So artillery remains effective, reserves remain usable, and command remains coherent. Here's what makes this battle different. Finland is not fighting for ground. Finland is fighting for a decision delay. As days pass into early July, the Soviet High Command faces a growing problem. Continuing to hammer the Finnish line here consumes time, ammunition, and attention, resources needed elsewhere. The summer of 1944 is not a single operation, it's a cascade across multiple fronts. If one segment stalls, the overall schedule strains. That doesn't mean the Soviets give up. It means priorities compete. A stalled offensive in Finland becomes a question. Is further effort here the best use of force? Or is it time to accept a limited outcome, especially if larger objectives in the Baltic and toward Germany demand concentration? This is the moment where battlefield endurance becomes political leverage. Finland's ability to hold changes the tone of what can be demanded and what can be refused. Not because Finland suddenly becomes stronger than the Soviet Union, but because Finland has proven it cannot be finished quickly without cost. Rehook, and the twist is that the payoff isn't a parade. The payoff is a negotiating position. By around mid-July, the Soviet offensive pressure on this sector eases and the front line stabilizes. The Soviets have achieved significant territorial gains in the broader offensive, but they have not broken Finland's capacity to resist decisively on the isthmus. That fact matters because it shapes the next phase, Finland's move toward an armistice that preserves statehood even at a steep price. The aftermath isn't victory in the comfortable sense. It's survival under constraint. Finland's independence remains intact, but the terms of peace involve painful concessions and a forced strategic pivot. The battle's legacy is therefore not just military, it is the link between battlefield mechanics and national outcomes. And Tali-Ihantala leaves another legacy too. It becomes a case study in how a smaller force can endure against a larger one when it maximizes the defender's advantages, terrain, timing, coordination, and disciplined use of reserves, while denying the attacker the one thing it needs most, a clean breakthrough. Final payoff. Tali-Ihantala mattered because it interrupted a timetable. It slowed an offensive meant to produce a rapid political collapse. It bought Finland the time needed to avoid total defeat, and proved that in modern war, survival can be engineered through operational method, not just courage. If there's one lesson from Tali-Ihantala, it's that a single decision, when to concentrate fire and when to refuse a reckless counterattack, can decide whether a nation bargains or breaks. If you want more stories where timing and terrain shape history, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next episode. Comment prompt. Which mattered more here, Finland's artillery coordination or the choice to fight for time instead of ground?